Good morning, everyone. This is Steve Chang, and I'm the Vice President of Strategy and Solutions with RMG Networks. I'm joined by Sheila McGee-Smith, President of McGee-Smith Analytics, and we're delighted to present to you today. As all of you have undoubtedly experienced, there are many changes underway in our work environment that have notable implications on how we work, communicate, and engage with employees. Today, we're going to share our views on this by discussing three key topics. First, what's changing and why in our work environment. Second, how companies are adapting with new ways to work. And three, what are some of the keys to success? Let me start by offering a point of view, though, on the overall challenge that organizations face in light of a changing work environment. Today, organizations continually seek and pursue ways to enhance employee engagement, but most struggle. Recent research by Gallup and Deloitte Consulting confirmed the startling situation. For example, only 13% of global employees are engaged, according to a recent survey by Gallup. And the numbers aren't much better when viewed in the U.S. Meanwhile, 78% of business leaders in a recent study by Deloitte Consulting are extremely worried about the level of employee engagement within their business. While there are countless articles and studies that confirm the positive impact of employee engagement on performance, achieving real results appears to be elusive. So what's really going on here, and why is engagement so challenging? Importantly, what can you do? To better understand this, Sheila's going to share some interesting perspectives on our rapidly changing work environment.
Thank you, Steve. So let's start with, times they are changing. So what is changing? Business models are changing. We think about companies like Uber, companies like Airbnb that didn't exist 3 years ago, competing with and in many cases usurping the way that business has been done in those two industries, hospitality and taxi transportation, for 100 years. In addition to that, there's sort of new business models. We have the increasing number and influence of millennials, people who grew up in the internet age and want and will only do business with companies that come to them and offer their products and services in a way that millennials want to consume them. Part of that is a democratization of the whole concept of a customer. For so many years, the notion was, build it and they will come. Companies created products and put them on the market and hoped that they would be bought and assumed that they would be bought. Customer democratization is about creating and designing solutions that meet the needs of customers as they describe their needs. So all of these influences are affecting different companies in different kinds of ways. So next slide for me, please. So BNSF Railway is a huge combined railway that combined an east and west and south railroad into one, cross-U.S. railway, multi-billion-dollar company. And a year ago, their CEO spoke to employees and gave a vision of the company for 2020. As they sat there in 2014, he said, we need to have a vision of where we want to take our business. What does the railroad of 2020 look like? I mean, the changes are changing the way companies look at themselves and reimagine themselves. So one of the things that happened with Railroad 2020 is coming up with a strategy that said, what do we have to look like? There are 48,000 team members at BNSF Railway, and all of those employees had to have a notion of, what is the directive? What does that mean to my job? How do I do what I do differently? One of the things that happened is a lot of IT, information technology, became outsourced because the CEO's vision was, let's have people at BNSF working on directives and projects that make us a better railroad. Taking care of servers and replacing circuits was not considered to be railway business. That was business that could be outsourced. So as I said, they started this directive in 2014, and in 2015 they took a great step and said, you know what, we're going to recognize 100 of the employees who have really stepped up to our initiative. So out of 48,000 people recognized this 100 in a very public ceremony in April of 2015. And so, you know, everybody being on the same page at this railway meant that people had an opportunity to excel and an opportunity to perform the way everyone wants to in their job. Next slide, please. And it's interesting to think of that 48,000 employee company, right? They'd be a great example of sort of laying over this kind of set of statistics that come from AARP. The workforce today is very diversified, right? Yes, there's 38% baby boomers, 32% from the Gen X, but millennials are a growing proportion of the workforce. This week I heard a statistic at a Microsoft event, a huge Microsoft event that I attended in Chicago, that by 2020, half the workforce will be millennials. So how does this graphic change so dramatically in the next 5 years? Well, today, 10,000 baby boomers are turning 65 every day. And while we, and I'm one of them, we may not be retiring, we're certainly beginning to think about retirement. And so, you know, that railway that today may look like this, with a very diversified workforce, go ahead 5 years and millennials are such a bigger piece. And why is that important? So go to the next slide, if you would. And it's important because millennials have a different sense of work-life balance. You know, baby boomers were all about post-war stress, getting ahead, buying a home, getting 2 cars in the garage. Millennials, who grew up as the children often of those boomers, want more of a balance in their life. They want flexible scheduling. They want to be rewarded for results. They want options to work from home. So as you think about your business and you think about how business is changing, how the workforce is changing, you have to ask yourself the question, are you implementing programs that are going to improve your organization's ability to recruit this new millennial workforce? Because these are the kinds of programs and options that they're going to be comparing employers against. Next slide. You know, another great example of this, you know, how things are changing. I remember coming into the workforce in the early 80s, and we were just on the cusp of personal computers and things like email. And the thought of email was, we so embraced it, right? Why did we embrace it? Because the day was driven by, when is the mail coming? I worked at AT&T, as did 1 million people, by the way, in 1980. It was the largest employer in the U.S. So I worked at AT&T, and twice a day the internal mail came by, right? And orders came through that way, and notes from your boss, and notes from headquarters. And the whole day was revolved around that morning and afternoon drop of mail, right? So things got much better with email. Think about instantaneous. Instead of all the FedExing we were doing in the 80s and 90s, documents could be shared almost instantly. But we've gotten to a point where perhaps we've gotten to email overload, the overflowing inbox, you know, which is increasing employee stress and actually leading to lower engagement. The time people are spending reading email, you know, it switches people's attention away from the project that they may be trying to complete. Think about being in the middle of an Excel spreadsheet and ding, you know, the Outlook dings. And it takes anyone 5 or so minutes just to get back into, especially something with Excel. What was I working on? Where was I? What was the formula? Trying to find documents. You know, the one thing about the old days with paper is you had files, you had cabinets, things were files. A lot of people haven't really overlaid that level of organization on their email world. You know, so many people don't use extra folders or file things. I mean, and I'm probably one of the guilty. I do have a fairly good organization scheme for my files, But I also have 5,000 emails in my inbox and 5,000 in my outbox. So this notion of finding a needle in a haystack certainly rings true for me. And then think about your new employees, the millennials. They're not used to email. I mean, anybody with children knows they don't read them. So if you send them, you know, they don't read them. And so you have to find new and more engaging ways to get the information to your employees that they need to have in order to, you know, be productive in your business. And if you don't make it easy for them to do their jobs, they will be looking around and choosing other, you know, other companies and other options. Next slide. You know, email is one sort of cost of the internet age. Another cost is just the overflow of data, gigantic big data. You know, for the last 2 or 3 years, we've talked about this notion of big data. The good news is that the cost of storage has become so low that everything's being stored. You can go back and get information on, you know, customer behavior that could go back 10 years. The problem is, how do you decide what it is you need? How do you present information in a way that's meaningful? How do you present information to employees just in time, when they need it? Not this constant stream of information, but information that is well presented and at the time when people actually need it. That's the challenge today. Next slide. And the challenge is only going to increase. There's a notion called the Internet of Things, and it begins with something that, you know, many of us are now carrying around in our pocket or on our wrist, which are these personal devices that count our steps and tell us what our activity level is and perhaps our blood pressure and pulse. But that is just the tip of the iceberg of this notion of the Internet of Things. Internet of Things refers to any objects that are connected to the Internet that can receive and send data. And it becomes part of the world of your company in that increasingly your products and services will be connected to the Internet as well. And so your customers will be connected to the Internet as well. So think of something as simple as the level of gas in your gas tank, right? And I'm talking about like a home gas tank. And it goes down to 20%, and it has a small Internet-enabled sensor in it that sends information to your provider that says, aha, time to ping this customer, they need more gas or oil or a refrigerator. This is a great example that one often hears. The filter for the water needs to be replaced, and a sensor sends that information to the refrigerator company or the refrigerator maintenance company, and again, an email can go out to the customer to say, this is what needs to be done. Okay, so the Internet of Things is about increasing the amount of data, but hopefully the ability to use that data to more proactively support both customers and employees. So it works with employees in terms of a company being able to know where their employees are. You know, so think about, let's go back to the refrigerator maintenance company, right? A refrigerator goes out of, you know, breaks down, okay? That information gets sent to the maintenance company. The maintenance company has sensors on the trucks that are out there, and they know where their trucks are, and they map that against where this customer is and are able to send the right service person to the customer to decrease and be most efficient in terms of getting that support to the customer. You know, that's a simple example. Think about the complex world of telephone services repair or cable repair, right? Being able to understand where the resources of your company are and being able to match them to demand in real time. Next slide. So one might think that, you know, I think I've heard of solutions to some of these issues, to email overload, to data analytics. companies like Microsoft with SharePoint, companies like Cisco with a solution, a collaboration solution that they've announced called Spark. Unify has a new solution called Circuit, IBM Verse. The issue becomes many companies are using multiple solutions. They may be using WebEx for conferencing. They may be using SharePoint to share files. They may be using IBM Verse for data analytics. And so the confusion still exists. From an employee perspective, how many systems do I need to keep track of in order to get the information that I need in real time to do my job as well as I need to do it? So I think that one of the things we need in business today in terms of employee engagement is a solution to this issue of the complexity of doing business today, the amount of data that needs to be sifted and sorted, and the number of systems that are out there that employees need to engage with. And I think Steve now is going to walk us through one of those types of solutions.
Yeah, thank you. As Sheila just shared, we're facing an ever-increasing volume of data, applications, the modalities, the different experiences and mobility that's fundamentally altering how people communicate and work. Because of this, we need to adapt to this new normal and modify how we communicate and collaborate, and even how we motivate employees and consolidate information so we can be, providing them with more timely and relevant information for people to do their jobs. So what does this really mean? Well, first, in terms of how we communicate, our messaging must become more targeted and relevant, timely for the individuals and groups being engaged versus solely relying on common messaging and information being sent to everyone. Additionally, we need to leverage a variety of communication channels to effectively reach our audience, who, by the way, are on the move and are selective and also, in many cases, distracted, versus solely relying on email and running into the situation Sheila described earlier, or simple things like bulletin boards that were used in the years past. The second thing we need to attend to in terms of how we collaborate, we need to introduce business practices that foster collaboration and enable employees to work in ways that balance both the objectives of the company and the individual needs, some of which Sheila shared earlier. And as we know, there are many different types of business models, but people are, sometimes working from home, and in many cases they're on the road, and we need to adapt our business practices to accommodate that. Third, in terms of how we motivate, your workforce will likely evolve and take on some of the characteristics that Sheila described. This is going to require different ways to engage and motivate people than perhaps what you may have done in the past. We've seen, for example, a number of companies implementing different approaches that gamify or kind of turn into, in a lighthearted way, competition across various aspects of their business. And, this could be team-based competition on customer service goals, or other kind of metrics that people can healthily engage in. And this, creates another incentive and a way for people to become more engaged, but staying focused on what they need to stay focused on. The fourth point I want to make is in terms of what we consolidate. And Sheila mentioned there are a range of tools and solutions that are being out there, but again, even that provides more things that could create clutter for the individual user. And given this explosion of the data, the information, and the tools, it's going to be necessary to filter things and help people prioritize and consolidate what really matters. Now, fortunately, there are a variety of tools and technologies that are emerging that enable these new ways to work and to enable improved engagement. For example, digital signage and desktop broadcasting, this is similar to a couple of the tools that we have here at RMG, along with things like WebEx and Link and other tools, provide improved ways to reach employees where they are and how they want to work in the new normal. Collaboration tools like SharePoint and Yammer are growing in use as companies figure out how to better engage the workforce, create more organic ways for people to collaborate and work together on the right topics, at the right time. How we motivate, I mentioned gamification. We're also seeing quite a lot of use of things like real-time scoreboards and dashboards, making performance data visible to people at the time of need so they know how they're doing. Again, something we at RMG have had quite a lot of experience with our customers who are very interested in helping employees better understand their performance on more real-time intervals. And even employee recognition is growing in use and enabled through technology to drive performance. So no longer just the days of a bulletin board and a picture of somebody, but, for example, portraying this through digital signage is becoming a more contemporary way to share notable recognition. And there are a number of tools such as our own RMG's InView and IBM's Verse and others that are being utilized to minimize the clutter and by consolidating, presenting only the pertinent information to users based on profiles and filters that are established. So I wanted to just take a couple minutes and to make this a bit real, just share a brief case study on how American Express is delivering on the promise of new ways to work. American Express, a couple of years ago, they made a key decision to embrace workforce flexibility as a key goal and enabler of growth. I think they saw their workforce was changing, some of their strategies of even how and where they work were changing, and they just embraced this at a strategic level. And so we're gonna accommodate this new changing composition of our workforce. And so they began to introduce more use of remote employees. And by the way, this introduced a whole new talent pool for them to tap into. They introduced a whole new set of tools and technology to enable collaboration and communication. Other things like office hoteling, real estate consolidation, these were all part of changing the work environment into what has become now kind of the new way to work for them. They also launched some training on contemporary matters, such as how to actually be an effective remote worker, given that their proportion of remote workers was growing or continued to grow at the time. The result, I think, and this has been published in kind of some of the journals and articles, American Express does cite they improved productivity, certainly achieved some efficiency by collapsing some of their real estate needs, and actually saw some improvements in retention as a result of this approach. So when we think about everything that we've just talked about for the past 20 minutes or so, what are some of the keys to success? And maybe these aren't comprehensive, but these are ones that certainly jump out to us. 4 key practices that I want to mention. First is to really forecast and understand the changing composition of your organization. As Sheila pointed out earlier, we're all likely to see a fairly significant shift in the underlying demographics of our employees, and it's important to get ahead of that, understand how your workforce might change and how their needs might evolve. Secondly, implementing strategies that engage, align, and motivate that evolving workforce, and making sure that what you do in terms of your engagement and motivation campaigns are relevant to these people. Thirdly, thinking ahead and ensuring everyone knows where you're headed. Sheila mentioned earlier a couple times kind of the vision of 2020. That's kind of keeping your head up and thinking about not only how the business is meant to compete in the future, but how the work environment needs to actually shape and evolve to support more effective performance. And then lastly, deploying technology and tools that drive engagement and a new way to work. So executed well, our experience and what we see is that enhanced engagement and new ways to work that fit well with your workforce can yield notable results in terms of retention and productivity, employee performance. So at this point, I guess we'd like to stop the presentation, and hopefully you got a couple of key points to consider as you think about your own workforce and its evolution. And we're going to open it up for questions now. Okay, so here's a question. Let me share this one that just came in. Our workforce has changed dramatically. We are now using a lot of contract call center workers. How do I communicate and engage with them? That's the question. So this is a very interesting phenomena. I think with the continued use of outsourcing as a contemporary part of your business model, you do start to end up in many companies with really a hybrid organization of your own internal employees and external employees, but ones that are very committed and should be committed and engaged within your business. They're really integrated into the core operations of your business. And I think our point of view and what we see on that is that you need to treat them like any employee, but segment your communications to them. And, there are different tools today, communication tools today available today that allow you to set up, different kind of audiences and user groups to segment and filter the messaging that goes to those different user groups and to monitor, everything from their feedback to their performance and behavior. One of our platforms that we use for digital signage and our desktop collaboration tool, it has that kind of capability where you can segment and basically distribute messages to the relevant employees and audiences. And that's one way that we see many of our customers treating the contract employees as employees, but segmenting which communications go to them.
Steve, if I may, what you just described so fits into the notion of outsourced contact center agents. So there's so many companies that have a core set of agents that are in-house, but rely on one or more outsourced companies to add agents for certain types of campaigns or for certain seasonality, right? And to your point, those agents need to understand the goals of the business, the shifts in the business, what's happening, what executive management wants out of various campaigns. But to your point, they don't need to know everything about what's going on. So that ability to have some information shared, the information that will help an outsourced contact center, add value to the work that they're doing for you, but to keep private the things that should be kept private.
Yep, it's great. That's a great point. Okay, I'm going to look through the queue. Here's another interesting question. We have a large workforce across many industrial facilities and many employees who don't sit at a desk and don't use email. How do I communicate and reach them? This is a classic challenge, certainly in an industrial environment. I think when you have people on the shop floor and who are working production practices, they're not going to a desk every day to read email or getting the kind of communications that perhaps others get in a corporate office or other kind of facilities. Again, I think one of the things that we see with many of the customers we work with is to really think about these different groupings of employees, almost like segmenting your population of employees, and then working backwards and figuring out what are the different communication tools that might be more relevant and appropriate for them. We certainly see a lot of our customers who have industrial facilities kind of moving away from email since nobody's using it anyway in the facilities, but they're putting up digital signage, and not just in the break rooms, but out on the shop floor where people can see real-time performance metrics and see things that are more relevant to their particular need. Okay, and here's one more question. I think, Sheila, this might be a good one for you to comment on. It says, many of our employees are out of the office working with mobile devices. How does this fit with the new normal?
So obviously, we know that everybody's out there. The good news is that mobile employees have mobile devices. What companies need to be much more mindful of than they have to date is thinking about those internal websites, those internal employee portals where information is being shared, and making sure that those are available either as dedicated mobile applications, which is one way to go, or at least can be rendered well on mobile devices. And that's often a problem. We know that very often an employee outside of the office can't access internal sites. There are lots of things that are being done in terms of security, of cloud-based information. It is possible to make that information available, and I think it's a mindset change that companies have to make. They have to make that change that says everybody's not in the office, and so restricting certain websites, internal websites, to people who are in a building, in a corporate location, is no longer viable. So you need to it's an IT issue, and it comes down to either making that site available mobily, from a mobile device, or actually creating a mobile application that is populated with the same data that's used to populate internal websites.
Very good. Well, we've reached the end point of our time allotment for the webinar. I want to thank everybody for joining, and feel free to reach out if you have any further questions, and we appreciate your participation today. Thank you.